Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Performance Management Review Feedback and 2025 Goal Setting session as part of the Hacking HR November series. I'm David Murray. I'm the CEO of Confirm, and I'm happy to be here to host this event with all y'all, as well as the panelists that will be joining momentarily. We have a lot of great content and topics, and of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions that come about. So with that, I'd love to welcome the panelists into the room, and we'll start the show. Howdy, folks. Hi, Wendy, Malvika, Rusty, Shaniqua. How are y'all doing today?
Hi there.
Great. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. All right. Well, I'd love to just start with just a quick popcorn around the room. If you just can introduce yourself and say what you're focused on. And if there's anything you want to put into the space as it relates to performance management, feel free to inject it. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of questions to dive in. So why don't we just go around here, starting with Malvika.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malvika. I'm the co-founder of Atlas Group, which is a human capital advisory firm driven by the core belief that to win in the marketplace, businesses must first win in the workplace. Excited to dive into the conversation.
Thank you. Rusty, go ahead.
Nice. Hi, good morning. I'm Rusty Gaylor from California. I'm a performance management consultant and a leadership development coach. And I work with high potential leaders mostly to get people out of their own way and break old habits. And I think performance management is one of those habits that probably needs to be broken. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Wendy, go ahead.
Oh, hi, I'm Wendy Ellis, Vice President of Talent and Learning at Health Edge, which is a SaaS technology company in the payer space. We kick off performance management on Monday, and I'm excited about this conversation.
Wonderful. Shaniqua, go ahead. Oh, we can't hear your mic, I don't think. Maybe you have to swap it out. All good. Not yet. We need to switch the input. We'll work on that, and once you're back, let us know, and then no worries. We'll continue with the intros. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I know that probably some folks that are joining are probably joining because they have a set of performance management practices that maybe they are not quite happy with, or they're kind of curious to learn more about if there are alternative approaches to what they're doing, or maybe they just want to improve the current process that they have, or even the outcome. So with that, we'll get it started here in terms of the questions. This first one, I'll kick it off to each person in the group. The thing that I think a lot of folks assume when going into performance management is that, the focus is development conversations, feedback conversations, but sometimes, performance measurement is an item on the table that's not always directly discussed. And so if we talk about separating those two things, performance measurement and development conversations, I'm curious to hear your perspectives on, do you find that it's most helpful to do those things together as part of your performance review or performance management process, or to do them separately? And feel free, we'll popcorn in, so feel free to chime in. And Shaniqua, when you think you have your audio, let us know, and we'll test it out again.
I'll be happy to start here because we do both. So we have a professional development goal that all of our employees set intentionally at the beginning of the year. And our mid-year review, we call it a mid-year check-in. What's going well? Where do we need to shift our focus to improve for the rest of the year? How are you progressing on your development goal? There's no rating involved. It's a check-in. End of year, there's ratings involved. You're talking about performance, but there's also a discussion on did you accomplish your professional development goal? And so, which is, yes, I did. No, I didn't. How did, and so we do a bit of a hybrid there, David.
Yeah, I think performance and development are inextricably linked. I think they are two sides of the same coin. The performance conversation is the feedback part. The development piece is the feed forward part. And I don't think you can have one without the other. So when you give performance feedback as a leader, it's important to help your people understand how working on their development areas will help them achieve their career goals. Having said that, I do think that there is a place for conversations that are focused solely on development. So if you're having a career conversation with a direct report, trying to understand their career aspirations and goals and You're working with them to craft an impactful development plan that is tailored to their specific career needs and goals. That's a meaty enough conversation that it could and at times should have its own space. The performance feedback, again, can be used as an input or a data point to inform the development plan. But I think you should be having quarterly or at least semi-annual conversations with people that are really focused on their career development and growth.
I'll just jump in with a comment. I see there's some comments coming in the chat, and Kathy Eastwood has called out the two things that I wanted to say, which is I love this idea of feedback versus feed forward, performance versus development. I think that's brilliant. And also, I think that we need to break the idea that when we talk about performance management, performance management process, that it's a process with a start and an end. It's continuous. It needs to be happening all around, continuously throughout the year, especially the feedback piece. I agree with the idea that the development conversation can be more periodic, whether that's quarterly or twice a year, and can be a separate conversation. But performance feedback should be happening all the time. And so I just want to make sure that when we call it performance management process, that people aren't thinking, oh, there's a start and an end to that process. It's something we do around the end of the year, November and December. No, performance management in terms of giving people feedback needs to be happening all year round.
Great point. We're still having trouble hearing you, Shaniqua. I think, maybe the input. Feel free to keep swapping out the input, and once you're in, feel free to chime in. So I hear a few things here. And certainly from different organizations that we work with, we hear that some folks like to have, a 6 month, an annual. The focus of maybe one is on development. The focus on another is around performance assessment. And absolutely, Rusty, to your point, a lot of organizations are sometimes using special tools to do continuous feedback and recognition on an ongoing basis. Great. So I'm going to popcorn between, questions kind of for everyone, and then also just individual questions that we have for individual panelists here. So I'm actually going to swap over here to this question here for Malvika. As a CHRO with a focus on talent management, what strategies do you recommend for aligning performance management with organizational objectives?
Yeah, so in my mind, the first step really is to understand the goals of the organization and what are the parameters within which we're working, meaning what are the business needs and context. So is your organization trying to become more innovative? Are you trying to roll out enterprise-wide AI initiatives, as many are doing right now? What is your North Star metric as a company? Is it revenue per employee? Is it daily active users? Right? Is capital efficiency top of mind for your CEO, for your board? What does your cash burn look like? The better we understand as HR professionals, the better we understand our businesses, the competitive landscape, the P&L, the clients, the better we can become at designing performance management processes that will link to the organizational objectives. So my number one strategy that I recommend to all HR leaders is understand your business inside and out, be a business leader first and an HR leader second. And that in and of itself will put you ahead of others, because having a strategic, business savvy HR leader and team is a massive competitive advantage.
Great call out. And definitely, I'm sure that many of us have worked with, HR leadership that has been very deeply connected closely to the business objectives and like the CEOs, like what they're trying to do with their team, and other folks that are kind of primarily focused on process and ensuring that all of the processes that an organization needs are there. And it's not like you can't have one without the other, but certainly in terms of an individual's focus, they can differ from one to the other. Anything anyone would like to add on this?
I'd like to add just a quick note. David, you said you can't have one without the other, referring to this like business partnering and process oriented. And you can. I've definitely worked in companies where there's plenty of process oriented HR that is just heads down on the process and they do not understand the business context. And so I think that's actually one of the, it's one of the things I love about hacking HR, which is just this broadening the scope of what is HR and what is the role. And I think that business perspective is so valuable and critical. And I would even go so far as to say that like a really good HR partner is not solely owning the HR processes by themselves. They're bringing other business partners into that process to help craft it and design it in order to achieve the goals of the company. So it's not like, oh, it's HR, toss it over to the HR person or the chief people officer. It's, hey, this is something that's relevant to our people, and the CEO has some ownership and responsibility for that. And so the best HR leaders, I think, are bringing in the CEO into some of those key decisions.
Am I
Good
working
call.
now? Can you
You
guys see
are
me?
excellent. Yes, go for it. Now you have to talk 5 times as much to make
My
up for it. So go
goodness.
ahead, speak freely.
So good morning, good afternoon, and wherever you are relative to attending today. My name is Shaniqua Albert. I am the HR director for KNZ Solutions. We are an IT solutions company that does solutions at scale. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for having me today, and this is a great opportunity to talk about. So I just wanted to go over the first question, and I'll kind of segue into one of my questions that I think you're going to ask me. When it comes to development, performance versus organizational, I think there is a clear distinction. In terms of how I do it and how our organization does is we meet people where they are. So when you're onboarded as a new hire, we provide that as part of our onboarding and an overview of the company's performance to date, like Q1, Q3, wherever you are in terms of where you arrive, and also what are the organizational goals, because the organizational goals, everyone should have the same competencies when it comes to that. But when it comes to specific goals relative to the job, this is where this person providing them with an overview of this is your job description. These are stretch opportunities. What is it that you would like to see yourself in terms of setting yourself up for success? It's very inclusive. It's very collaborative. So there's buy-in from the beginning, because I believe engagement it needs to be part of it. And it also needs to be part, like your culture should also be part of the process as well. So providing with an overview of where we are, where we're trying to go, and our goals as an organization is one, tells them about who we are, and two, including them in the process in terms of next steps and where their goals are for development is also there as well.
Excellent. And this is a good tie-in then, for this question for the group, and then we'll jump to the one for you specifically, Shaniqua. So what process generally do folks think is most effective, if they have a favorite process or a set of processes, to link employee goals to company goals?
So I think, as with most things, it has to start at the top. I think Rusty mentioned earlier the involvement of the CEO. So if the CEO and the executive team have done their job of putting together a great long-range plan and setting the direction and the company priorities for the upcoming year, then it becomes a lot easier to sort of cascade those priorities down and have your middle managers and your frontline managers set goals for their teams that are aligned with those company goals. So I think that tone has to be set at the top. And I think this process requires a fair amount of transparency, and it requires leaders placing trust in their people. It doesn't work if you have a secretive hush-hush process that only a select few people at the top are privy to. But there's another important part of this equation, which is that we are in a world where the volume and the pace of change hitting our businesses is only continuing to accelerate. So just look at AI, right? You might be using an AI tool today that's probably going to be outdated a few weeks from now, certainly months from now, because that's how fast the technology is evolving. And so in an environment like that, where everything is changing so rapidly, your business priorities are changing. And so therefore the direction of the business is changing, which means your team and individual level goals are changing. Mm-hmm. And what that means is you need to go back to your goals over and over on a regular basis, mm-hmm. and make sure that they still make sense and that they're still relevant. And we're no longer in a business environment where we can have a set it and forget it approach and look at these things at the beginning of the year and then not revisit them until the end of the year. We're just in a completely different world now.
I'm seeing a comment from Kathy here. She says, I love using OKRs for this process, top down envision and bottoms up process to ask individuals to brainstorm on what they can do to drive that success. Certainly many companies use OKRs or objectives and key results as a way to have those hierarchical goals kind of coming from the top, but also be able to have those goals coming from the bottom at the same time and find a way to meet in the middle. Are there any other methodologies or processes that folks are familiar with that they find to be effective?
I just wanted to add one thing about, we use OKRs here, and agreed with everything Malvika said. One of the things that I think that we as HR leaders cannot take for granted is that our managers know how to cascade, and our managers know how to help create that connection from the employee individual contributor level to the company's strategic OKR. So there's a learning component there that cannot be forgotten whenever you're doing the cascading and you're doing that connections, that I think is super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add two thoughts. I totally agree. I think, Wendy, that's such a good point, right? People don't necessarily know how to do this. They understand conceptually, but there's a breakdown in the how. And so the two things I was thinking about is, number one is having some kind of coordinated meeting amongst people. So it's not just one-to-one between, especially at the mid-level manager and the senior leadership, but that it's more team-oriented, so that there's some visibility into what other people's goals are and how those goals all work together to drive the higher business level objective. And that also addresses some of this how, because there's cross-learning when you have everyone in the same room at the same time. So that's one point. And then the second thing is to echo what Malvika said earlier, is this idea of revisiting goals.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely worked in companies where it's set it and forget it. It's like you put the goal out at the beginning of the year and nobody remembers what it is 6 months later until the end of the year, when it's like, oh, we're doing our performance review again. What were the goals that I had? And so having more of a consistent process to review them, especially because the business environment changes, priorities change, and so on. And this is one of the big downfalls, especially in larger corporate environments. You get so caught up in the routine of doing what you do every day. You come in and you've got these meetings, you've got this email you need to respond to, and so on. And you kind of lose track of, what are we trying to accomplish here? And you get caught up in the minutia. And I've seen that in many, many large corporations. And so putting a more robust process in place to actually keep track of the goals on a quarter-to-quarter basis can be really valuable, not just to make sure that they're relevant for the performance management process, but also just to keep the business moving forward in a productive way.
Yeah, and if I could just kind of wrap up and say, all of you had great points. I think I heard communication is a common theme. One, communicating what the OKRs are, the objectives and the expected key results. Two, making sure that managers are trained, that you're agile and meeting people where they are. And then also relative to, answering the question, is making sure that the staff, right, know their role towards achieving those results. So where do I fit in towards the big scheme of things, so that they understand that, and then having that constant cadence. So having weekly touch points, for us, we keep a weekly action report. So each person, not in addition to knowing what their quarterly goals are, how are we going to get there? Help them, set them up for success of that journey of how do I achieve this result, and having that touch point. Because to your point, Rusty, people, like you said, they see performance review as a one-time thing for the year, and it shouldn't be. It should be a weekly, or at least at a minimum, a monthly cadence of how am I doing? Where am I at? Are we achieving the goals as our department, as an organization, and where do I fit in towards achieving that?
That's excellent.
So if I can just add one other thought, thank you, Shaniqua, for that point. And I would say that's another reason why this is not just an HR responsibility. Because if you think about it the way you just described it, Shaniqua, this is about the business achieving the goals, its goals. And that's not an HR problem, that's a business problem. And so that's something that's like, it often gets put on HR shoulders. And I think that's one of the opportunities for HR leaders or chief people officers to be not taking that on 100% themselves, right? Yes, they can own the process and they can drive a lot of the structure and so on, but how do you engage the business? How do you partner with them? Because when done well, this enables the whole business to be successful.
Absolutely.
I see a comment in the chat that I think will be a great transition to Shaniqua, to asking this goals related question to you. So we have Dean's comment here. OKRs don't get the business emotionally behind the goal. They need a why first and then the hard numbers. And So I think, which it's a fascinating thing, right? We talk about, having a bunch of goals, but if people aren't feeling the passion, the energy, the interest to get those goals done, then not much changes. So my question to you then is, with your expertise in data and analytics, how can organizations set meaningful goals that drive performance improvement in the upcoming year?
Absolutely. So relative to data, dirty data in is dirty data out. So one, making sure that your data is cleansed, that it makes sense. Having a look back. So what I was speaking to earlier about having that review. How did we perform? Let's look at the data analytics. What did it tell us? What is the story behind it? Are we satisfied with that? Where are our opportunities? So making sure when it comes to data that you're understanding the data, that you're interpreting it and applying it at the right level. So for instance, our sales team is going to have a different performance goal than somebody in admin, right? So making sure that wherever you apply the data, that it's specific to the role, specific to the goals of the organization, and being able to use that in terms of like metrics. So weighted goals, how are you using that? And when it comes to systems and data analytics, I believe that we should dip your toe, have a scaled approach to that. So with the data analytics, it will tell you like, how are we successful? Where are we looking at? Whether it's in the talent area, whether it's in the sales, cost of goods, it tells you the story and it needs to be fed down to the staff. So being able to interpret it, apply it to the role, to the position, and to the units for the staff.
Excellent. I'm going to transition now over to a little bit of a different topic, but absolutely relevant to the conversation, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do folks think is an approach that works well to ensure that performance reviews are equitable across groups?
I'm happy to start with that one. So I think there's there's a lot of components to this. There's the standardized criteria, rating scales across teams that are equitable. There's the use of calibration sessions to make sure that you are comparing talent and ratings equitably. But there's also the other pieces that are cultural in nature. Is do you have a high level of respect and trust in your organization? Do you provide a culture where you can speak up and bring forth challenges in these cycles? And then there's this training component to it that we focus on quite a bit around our biases and calling them out and saying everyone has them. And you need, as you're going through this performance review process, you need to recognize some of these biases. And we provide training not only to our people managers on that, but also all of our employees that are going through the performance review cycle. And we just shine a light on it. Mm-hmm. And from our CEO down, set expectations on what we expect in this cycle. And so those are just some of the things that we do here. I'm sure the rest of the panelists probably have tons of ideas, but we really want the culture piece around trust, respect, and understanding your biases to be front and center in this cycle so that people know that that's something that we talk about.
Yeah. To piggyback off of that, having equity as an organization means that we all have the same organizational goals that we strive to achieve, surrounded by our values. Then you have your team competencies. What are the achievements that you're looking for on a team level, and then on the individual level? So we look at it from a 3-tiered approach, and then also making sure that our systems, from being able to weight it, that we're using the same metrics. So for instance, everyone should have the same relative to competencies on the organizational level, team level, individual level, towards being able to assess whether you are achieving your goals as a team, as an individual, and as an organization as well. So that's how we ensure equity.
I agree with so many of the points made. I think bias training is so important. Calibration meetings can help as well. Kind of adjust for leaders who are too harsh or too lenient. Now we even have AI tools built into certain systems that can look at bias language and provide managers with suggestions on how to correct for bias. For anyone who's interested, Textio offers a free course through Textio U on equitable performance feedback. So you can take it, have your managers take it, and even your individual contributors take it. So I think those are all really important steps. But to me, the one lever that we don't pull often, that we should pull more often, is clarity. So to me, good quality feedback, just-in-time feedback, is equitable feedback. Mm-hmm. So it's about building a habit that we need to help our managers build this habit of providing clearer feedback that's timely. And when we see that the feedback is not clear, like all of us, I'm sure, have come across managers who give feedback like, you need to work on your communication skills, or you come across as too aggressive, right? So when we come across that, we need to help our managers de-blur that feedback so that their team members know exactly what they need to do, so that it's actionable and so that it helps them get better in their job every day and unlock their full potential. And we know now from data that certain groups receive feedback on their contributions, and certain groups, like women, for example, receive feedback on their personalities more often. So when we help our managers de-blur that personality traits feedback or any unclear feedback, then we're automatically making strides toward a world where feedback and performance reviews are more equitable.
It's a great point. And one of the pitfalls that I think is important for people to be aware of, specifically with continuous feedback and recognition, is that it's not always shared evenly, right? That there are certain organizations and certain people and certain groups that may feel more psychologically safe to give that feedback or that recognition. They may feel more energized. They may just be more extroverted, or they may be even trying to game the system. You know, you have your peer 360s where people, you know, sometimes pick people to write about them, and they may be trying to, you know, game that system. So making sure that you have checks and balances so that it's not just kind of free field, everyone doing their own thing, that you need to make sure that those folks that may not be proactively recognized through your continuous feedback process, that there is some kind of methodology for them.
If I could piggyback off of that, just on the bias level, unfortunately, it is present throughout the employment cycle, but having checks and balances. So encouraging managers to take a look and up levels to make sure that there is equity. And if there's someone that is struggling, to your point, Malvika, to identify that very early on, to provide them, one, don't make assumptions that they know how to achieve the goal. You know, what resources are we providing to them? You'd be surprised at how many managers don't know how to write a SMART goal. So making sure that the goal is clear, it's clarity, like you said, it's concise and it's achievable. So those are different things that need to be tempered throughout the performance review process, and not just at that time, but throughout the whole year.
Wonderful. You know, there are obviously many of the biases that those who've had unconscious bias training are familiar with. I'm going to mention a couple that are specific to actually performance reviews, because I think they're ones that don't get talked about very much, but there's a lot of interesting research around. One of them, probably the most important one as it relates to performance assessment, this isn't the development side, the assessment side, is the idiosyncratic manager rating bias. There's a gentleman named Maynard Golf 20 years ago who did the study on manager ratings. You know, when you're giving that score, you know, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. I know some folks are like, no numbers, you know, meets expectations, exceeds expectations, whatever that looks like for you. That research shows that about 60% of those ratings that managers give are more about the manager as a rater. Are they an easy rater or a hard rater? And then about 20% is noise, and 20% is the person's actual performance. And so this is one of the reasons why, of course, manager perspectives are critical to your assessments, but it's important to have other voices. So that's where sometimes, you know, again, peer feedback or 360s can be helpful, but people can cherry pick, you know, people to say good things about them. So there are other methodologies as well. Organizational network analysis is one that Confirm uses to combat bias in this regard, but there are many others that are out there. So I think it's a great important topic, and all of your points are excellent. I'm going to move on to back to the individual questions here. This question here is for Wendy. As VP of Talent and Learning, how have you seen feedback enhance employee performance in your organization?
Well, there's a couple of ways, some key initiatives that we've done to address this. And one of those is we emphasize continuous learning by providing managers with frameworks and tools to provide feedback their feedback delivery. We specifically use the COIN model here, and it's woven into all of our programs. I think this approach has led to more realistic performance evaluations, and we've proven that because we've been able to get better alignment between self-assessments and manager reviews, and we've addressed that gap over the last couple of years. The other piece is that we actively seek our employee feedback on our performance review process, our cycle. After every cycle, we do focus groups, and they've helped design and evolve our performance review forms, feedback over the last 2 years, and they've played a part in it because they've actually seen their feedback come to life in some of the choices that we've made.
Wonderful. Any reflections from any of y'all's other organizations that you want to put into the space?
I think this idea of getting feedback on the feedback is an important one. And so I've, like Wendy, I've done focus groups in the past. I've also been in organizations where you don't have the ability to take people out of their day jobs to do focus groups. So what the other thing that I've done is incorporate some questions into the performance feedback cycle. So when people are doing their self-assessment, they then rate the quality of feedback that they're receiving. So in my mind, really, if you have a robust performance management process, you want people to come away with 3 things. You want people to understand what their goals are and what is expected of them very clearly. You want them to feel that they're receiving actionable and timely and regular feedback. And you want them to feel that their manager is invested in their career growth and development, and that they are getting career mobility and career growth conversations out of the performance management process as well. So in order to assess those 3 things, what I've done in the past is ask employees to rate the following 3 statements. The first one is, I understand what is expected of me. The second one is, I receive timely and actionable feedback on my performance. And the third one is, my manager is invested in my career growth and development. And you can use a Likert scale or a yes or no or some other scale. But once you start to gather this data, anonymously, of course, then you can see over time how it's trending. You can see how employees are responding. And then you can start to use this data to provide very specific and tailored coaching to managers in different areas. So if the marketing team rated low on question number 1, then you know that that team's leaders probably need more help with their goal setting and expectation setting. If engineering scored low on number 3, then the engineering leaders may need more help on having career conversations and creating individual development plans. So now you're tailoring your coaching and training rather than coming to your managers with this one size fits none approach, a generic approach, and you've already lost them.
And I'd just like to tag on to that. I think that's great. And those 3 questions happen to overlap with 3 of the core questions that predict employee engagement and satisfaction in their role. And so, we're talking here about the performance management process, but I keep trying to expand the scope, if you will, to think about this is not just about performance management. This drives success of the company. And those 3 questions of, do I know what's expected of me? Am I getting feedback? And basically, does my manager care? And are they invested in my career development? Those 3 things drive so much in terms of just the employee's satisfaction at work. And we all know that employee satisfaction drives company performance.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think you all have great points. I'm like, that would be fantastic. And what I came with is, the ability to do a 360, not only on the individual and teams, but also on the manager and the organization. How are they? Are they supporting me? Do I feel like I have the resources that I need? These are things that can be achieved through pulse checks throughout the year to keep it anonymous and not specific to a certain time. But evaluate not only yourself, but my manager. Are they making time for me? Are they present when I'm talking with them? Have they offered resources to me? Have they told me about opportunities that might be available? And as an organization, are you capturing all of the greatness in me? Do we have systems that support me being able to brag about myself? being able to tell you that I just got my master's or a certification. All of these things are 360. So it's just not about the individual, but it's also about the culture, the company, and where you're trying to go.
And I just want to add one more thing, because I really think, Rusty, you've made a great point about it's not just about performance management, but it's about employee engagement. And Malvika, your questions that you were saying, they're built into our employee engagement survey, specifically around manager effectiveness. So we have an 88% or higher OKR on manager effectiveness. And anybody who scores below that in our organization, we do proactive outreach to them and their managers, the business partners do, because that is such an important factor when you think about the employee experience and the impact a manager has on employees individually. And those questions about, do I know what my role is? How is my manager helping support my career growth? All of that's in there. And so I do think that that's another linking all of those things together. These common threads are super important around the employee experience.
That's excellent. So, we've talked about goals. We've talked about kind of outcomes and alignment. We've talked about, reflecting on the process. I'd love to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the process itself. This is a question just for the group. Based on y'all's experience, what's most effective in terms of the structure? If we're talking specifically about not the continuous piece, but actually like the performance assessment piece, when you have like an actual kind of performance review cycle, do you think that what's most effective is a highly structured performance review template where everybody has the exact same set of questions that they're filling out, or something that's more flexible, for example, letting each group or manager provide feedback or assessment in their own way?
I'm going to give a very HR answer to this and say it depends. I think it depends on two things. So first, what is the experience level of your managers? And what problem are you trying to solve for? So if you have experienced leaders for the most part who are seasoned at this, then you can probably get away with a more flexible approach. If you are a fast growing startup, I've worked in a lot of startups where usually a bunch of people who are excellent individual contributors are promoted to being managers. And so you have a lot of brand new managers who are new to this. In that case, they could probably do with a little bit more structure. And the second part of this is, what is the historical context and the problem you're trying to solve for, right? So look at the data from your past performance reviews and look at what approach was used and how did it go? Do you have a problem of bias? Do you have a problem of leaders being too harsh or lenient? You can probably get a sense of that if you just do a quick audit. Just take 10% of past performance reviews and glance at them with your HR team, and you should be able to tell whether consistency is a problem, whether you need a standard approach. And the final thing I'll say is, it doesn't have to be either or. I think Wendy said this earlier, right? You could mix and match and let your leaders experiment. So you could give them some flexibility when it comes to their quarterly check-ins and let them decide on their own way of providing feedback every quarter. But then when you have your mid-year review or your annual review, you could give them a more structured template. And probably the structured template will be beneficial, especially if you are in an organization that ties pay to performance. So if you are making merit increase decisions and bonus decisions based on performance reviews and performance scores, then you probably want to have a more structured template to make sure that you're being fair and transparent. And the grid on which you place excellence is a standard grid across the board, and it's easily understood by all of your employees.
Excellent. This is a great transition then to a question for you, Rusty. So with your background in executive coaching, et cetera, how can leaders foster a culture of open feedback to improve performance outcomes?
It's such a good question. I think actually some of the chat has actually alluded to this question and has come up in the conversation is you have across an organization, you've got some people who are more likely to give feedback and others who are less likely to give feedback. And so cultivating that openness it's really critical. And I don't remember who said this, but one of our panelists here said earlier that like so much of this, it starts top down. And so having a leader at the top who can model both the giving and the receiving of feedback. And I think that's a particularly important piece. So many leaders understand part of their role is to give feedback, but they don't necessarily open themselves up to receiving feedback or even asking for feedback and prompting that from others. So to me, this is really one of those things that actually becomes quite easy to do if you focus on doing it. And so any leader who's wanting to cultivate this habit of giving feedback, it can be as simple as giving yourself a goal to give at least one person feedback every day. Or if you're more practiced than that, you can even lean in and do it more often. But this is one of those things that, yes, there are skills you can learn, but a lot of this is also just building it into the habits. I mentioned earlier as I was doing my introduction, so much of what we do day to day in our work life is habit, because we're doing very much today similar things to what we did yesterday and last week and last month. So starting to change a new habit, build a new habit, break an old habit, that requires some practice and some discipline. And so it's a very simple piece of advice, but the biggest thing that I suggest to the people that I work with is to just do it and to give yourself a goal and start practicing.
I just want to add a little bit to this, because the giving and receiving of feedback seems to be the hardest skill for managers to learn. And they often associate feedback with the word fear. And so it's important for organizations to reframe that. And also, one of the things that I find that is effective is managers, we say this over and over again, who have a high EQ can ask for feedback and not be afraid to ask for feedback from their teams. I also, I believe that being a people manager is a privilege. And it is not something that you are entitled to. You don't wake up one day knowing how to manage people. And so it is super critical if you are impacting people's lives in the workplace. And that also bleeds outside the workplace. And so as a people manager, I believe that it's a privilege to be able to lead others. And part of my responsibility of having that privilege is giving feedback and asking for feedback. And that is something that in my LinkedIn post I talk about in our manager programs that we have here, that it really is a privilege, and you should be investing in yourself as a leader on how to do these things as basic as giving feedback, or don't do it. Opt out. Say opt out.
That's excellent. There's this research that I know many folks are familiar with, but in case folks aren't, around psychological safety and team performance. A research study from Google from, I don't know, is it 10 years ago, 15 years ago now? They found that of all of the different aspects of a team that can determine whether that team will be effective, they found that psychological safety was the most important indicator of team effectiveness. It wasn't having a brilliant set of folks with everyone has like a crazy high IQ. It was psychological safety. And I think a lot of this is to your point, Wendy. It's like being able to know how to give that feedback, to be able to ask for that feedback, to have folks that are trained to know how to craft the feedback and to craft asking for the feedback. These are all, these are tough if you've never done it before, or if you're a new manager, which is a great transition to this next question for the group. How can feedback be structured to ensure it is constructive and leads to actionable improvement?
Okay, I'll take this one on first too, and just tell you kind of some practices that we use. And one is the COIN model. I spoke about that earlier. It's weaved into everything that we do here at Health Edge when we talk about feedback. That's the context, observation, impact, and next steps, because it takes the emotion out of it, and it's speaking factual examples about what happened. What were the manager's observation? What was the impact to the company, the team, and also next steps? What are you going to do after that? How are you going to address the behavior or whatever happened? The other piece is we've taken the command and control approach with corrective action. We don't even use those words here. We use progressive coaching, meaning that your manager believes in you and your capabilities and your skills. And if you're struggling, we are going to have progressive coaching conversations, which include documenting the issues that you're having, but coming up together with an action plan and it's a more empowering, adaptive approach to addressing underperformance. And so it has just shifted the way that people think about their performance. And we want people to succeed, and we believe in that. And just moving away from CAP, PIP, all of that language that has historically been involved as part of corrective action with HR teams. So those are some of the things that we've done here.
I think it's important to meet people where they are. So we've talked about emerging, like new managers where they are, providing them with the support. And also in terms of the goal of performance reviews is to, one, I believe, to be valued, seen, and heard. We want to make sure that employees know that they're valued, that they're seen, and that we're providing opportunities for them to contribute to their success and to the organization's success. So making sure that managers are intentional with their time and consistent, and making sure that they're giving frequent feedback. It doesn't have to be perfect. Communicate. We're figuring this out together, but we are going to achieve it together, and we're going to get better together. So meeting people where they are, making sure that we're providing places and spaces for them to give feedback and for us to give them feedback, knowing that we don't have it all figured out. I've been in HR for over 20 years, and I have to say, like, performance reviews have not gone A, B, C, and D. It's fluid. It is fluid. So let's just want to level set that. Thank you.
It's every year, right, when we get to performance review season and we see like the articles coming out, right, like every year you see folks being like, abandon the annual performance review, and then you have folks being like, if you only do continuous feedback, how do you know like who are the high performers? Like it's just always going to be a struggle to get to a process that's perfect, and we'll never have one that's perfect. But I will say, only just because, at least at Confirm here, we spent like 5 years living and breathing this challenge that, to your point, Shaniqua, meeting people where they are is critical, and also making sure that there's a psychologically safe way for people to surface what they see and what they hear, and that it's not just pure cherry picking of, I picked you to be my peer so you can say something about me, or, only managers are allowed to say something about the people on their team. Like you need some kind of vehicle to have a voice to be able to hear, maybe things like, who do people go to for help and advice? Who do they see as outstanding around them? Or maybe who are they concerned about needs additional support or attention? Making sure that you have some kind of methodologies to enable those voices for everyone on your team is critical. And organizational network analysis is one way to do it, but there are many ways to do it as well.
Hey, David, can I just piggyback a thought onto that? And I love the coin model that Wendy shared. It's easy to think about like, what are the tool sets, or what's the framework that you use to deliver feedback? But I think that one of the points that was made earlier, I think this was Wendy as well, actually, which is absent of the specific skills that you need to deliver feedback, is helping people reframe the whole conversation. And I think this statement of people who give feedback have high IQ, or high EQ, excuse me. And I love that, because it's an aspirational statement, and everyone's going to want to raise their hand and be like, well, I have high EQ. And so it's helping people to step into this, reframing this idea of feedback to say, it's not something to be afraid of. This is like, if you care about someone, you're willing to give them feedback. You're willing to tell them the truth. And so to reframe it, to emphasize that it's something that does require and demonstrate high EQ. So to shift people's thinking about it, because I do think that there's a lot of a stigma that gets associated with performance reviews and feedback and so on, and everybody gets worried, like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to have this conversation. And so helping people to reframe that and give them some tools to reframe it, not only for themselves, but also in the midst of the conversation. So when you go into a conversation, it's not like, hey, I'm going to give you feedback, and the other person's like, oh no, here it comes. But hey, I'd like to share some observations with you, because like, I really want you to succeed, and I'm like, I want to partner with you, and so I want to give you this information because it might help you to be more successful. And just a simple reframing like that, and giving some people some tools to do that, can be really effective, in addition to structured tools like the coin model that Wendy mentioned.
Wonderful.
I think the key word there is partnership. There's so many feedback frameworks, right? There's SBI, there's STAR, there's COIN, as Wendy said. but I think the idea is to offer and ask for the other person's perspective, so that they don't feel like this is something that's being done to them. They feel that there is a partnership here. And if you don't involve people in the conversation, then your likelihood of success is just much lower, because you're not going to get their buy-in to make whatever improvements that they want to make. So if you want actionable improvement, it has to be a partnership, to Rusty's point.
One book from many years ago, but still a very helpful one, Crucial Conversations. For those who haven't read it, it talks about how do you make conversations safe, to have conversations like this. And one of the things they talk about is the first thing that you do is you make it safe, right? Which can be done in many ways, but sometimes it's acknowledging and appreciating the things that are going well, the things that you value. Some people call that the poo sandwich, if you will, right? You have the compliment followed by the constructive feedback followed by another kind of positive thing. I mean, there are many ways to look at it, but the idea of partnership, of, seeing beyond the critical piece of what you need to share, but also recognizing the things that you value can make those conversations smoother. I'm going to jump to one last question here, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So this last one, I mean, honestly, we could probably talk forever on it, but what common pitfalls should organizations avoid when implementing performance management strategies? Feel free, if each of you want to just share a brief reflection of maybe the most important thing that comes to your minds. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first. I think some pitfalls are solely relying on those annual performance reviews, overemphasizing ratings without context, and then neglecting to train managers on feedback and bias. Those would be three things that I would say at this point.
I think one common pitfall that I see is the thinking that lifting and shifting the technology is going to change everything. I see this very often. It's about changing behaviors and mindsets and habits, to Rusty's earlier point, in addition to having great tech to support your performance process. The other one that I see is not setting the tone at the top. So when senior leaders are not role modeling the behaviors that they seek in the rest of the leaders, that's the quickest way to undermine your performance management process. It sends the message, this process is for the rest of you. It's not good enough for the few of us at the top with the important jobs, right? And then lastly, treating performance management as a one-way street, when in fact feedback should be a two-way street, and we should constantly be gathering upward feedback on our leadership effectiveness as well.
I'll add the piece about calibration meetings across teams. I just thought that the statistic, David, you said earlier was something like 60% of a performance evaluation rating is based on the person giving the rating. It's just their scale and what's important to them. So I think that just, to me, from my personal experience, plus that statistic, just underlines the importance of having that kind of calibration. Of course, in addition to everything else that was already said.
If and I could add accountability. I think leadership needs to model that, and people need to hear it, that we are holding managers, leaders accountable as well for the process, because it's only going to be a good process if everyone is buying in and doing what they're supposed to do to it. And also the assumption that people know how. Again, just how to write an effective SMART goal. Don't assume. Provide resources. Provide psychological safety for people who don't want to raise their hand, if they know where to get assistance relative to that. And also making sure that cultural competence is part of the training. So in addition to psychological safety, providing people with information on what it is to be culturally competent when you lead a team is also vital.
Amazing. I feel like just the last 60 seconds or 2 minutes alone, or if you weren't listening to anything else, those are some really, really critical things to keep in mind. So awesome from each of you. With that, we'll open up the floor. I know that folks have asked already some questions in the comments, so I'm going to jump to some of them. First of all, I will echo the sentiment that software will not solve a cultural problem. So I love that that's been shared. I think that sometimes we look for that, and absolutely, I can say, having software in this realm, absolutely, it's true. Question from Sarah a little bit earlier. I wanted to ask, what training programs do you suggest to become the best people manager you can be?
So first I'm not sure, what your company offers, but I would check into with your learning and development department to see if there are any new to management programs or basic people management programs. Also, if you partner with LinkedIn or Udemy or any of those other learning companies, there's massive amounts of resources available to you. They often have management learning paths already set up. Those are some very basics that are usually available. And there are quite a few people on LinkedIn in general that you can follow that provide resources free all the time. So that's, I do a ton of research on LinkedIn and follow people that, providing those free resources. There's so much free information out there that I think that there's probably, with a little bit of research, you'll be able to find something that fits you.
If I could just add to that, in addition to what you said, is finding a good mentor. So if you see one modeling the behavior and the leadership skills that you would like to have or possess one day, reach out to them, seek a mentor. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't have the resources. So to Wendy's point, there's a plethora of available resources online. LinkedIn Learning is probably one of the top ones that I would say it's worth the investment. Invest in yourself if you need to.
Excellent. Next question here. Actually, well, this one could be a can of worms, but we'll just get quick version again. This is from an anonymous user. Do you already use AI for development and or performance reviews? Curious to see if anyone's using AI.
So my view is I don't think we're at a point yet where we should be using AI to make final decisions without human review or human intervention. The technology is still evolving. There's concerns about bias and all types of things, right? But I do think that there is room to use AI to aid managers, to help them de-bias feedback or de-blur feedback or make it clearer. So Textio has a solution for that. There's another organization that I work with that's doing a fantastic job of leadership coaching. It's called Kindred Minds. And I love this tool, and it's not just because I sit on their advisory board, but this is an AI leadership coaching tool that helps managers. It will join your one-on-ones as long as you give it permission, obviously. It's integrated into Slack where you're already working, and it's giving you real-time feedback on your interactions with your people and how you can get better. And the feedback is only shared with the manager, not with HR, not with higher ups. And so it's like having an executive coach, but you're taking the power of your executive coach and scaling it to all of your leaders. So that's one tool that I really love.
I can say that summarization tends to be kind of the safest use of AI that we've seen in it for both, like, for example, engagement surveys, as well as for like performance feedback that's already been given. When it comes to the generation of new content, that's where sometimes we see introduction of biases that shouldn't be there. So good call out. Question from
one other brief comment on that. Malvika has used this term to de-blur feedback when people give feedback that's kind of high level and not very actionable. And I think that's one of the dangers of using AI, is that it tends to be more blurry. It tends to be just more at abstract and not as actionable. And so certainly in terms of generating content, that's certainly a risk to look out for.
Excellent. I'm realizing here we only have a couple minutes, so I think it'll be great to wrap up. Maybe we'll do just one quick round the room. We can start from the other side this time. So we'll start with you, Shaniqua. If you were to distill or take down any kind of key takeaway, learning, reflection, or even just words of wisdom that you want to impart to the audience, acknowledging, they came to learn about reviews, about feedback, about goal setting for 2025, performance management in general. There's one key nugget or takeaway, what might you leave folks with? And again, we'll go this time the other way, starting with you, Shaniqua.
Sure. Just remember that when people join your organization, they want to be successful. No one joins to be unsuccessful. So provide opportunities for success. Ensure that you're providing places and spaces for people to be valued, seen, and heard on how they're doing. They want to know. Provide them with feedback and be consistent. Take care of your people, and your people will take care of you.
Wendy.
I think that when we, I keep going back to what Rusty was saying about looking at the bigger picture of the employee experience and all of the pieces that come into play whenever you're designing a performance management program, rolling it out, modifying it. So thinking about those cultural pieces and whether or not that you have psychological safety, do you have effective managers that know how to give and receive feedback, and just the principle of agility needs to come into play here. I think it's crucial, and that you should be able to have some flexibility to scale or to shift to meet the needs of your employees.
Rusty.
Yeah, the key things that I continue to think about is, number one is, while HR owns the process, this is not an HR task, if you will. This is a business question because the ability for the team to execute and be aligned on goals is what's going to determine the business success or not. As Shaniqua said, take care of your people and they will take care of you. That includes them knowing what is expected of them and getting feedback on how they're performing. And to go with that is, it's not a process that has a distinct beginning and end, especially performance feedback on assessment. How are you doing towards your goals? That should be an ongoing process throughout the year, continuous.
Mavika.
Yeah, tied to that, my guiding North Star on this topic is your performance management process ultimately should be driving business performance. It's as simple as that. So if, as the CEO or the CHRO, you're not able to make the connection between performance management and how it's driving your business agenda forward, you've already lost the plot. So that would be my number one advice and guiding principle to everyone.
Excellent. And with that, thank you, panelists, Shaniqua, Wendy, Rusty, Mavika. It was wonderful to hear your words of wisdom. I want to thank everyone for attending and wishing you all the best of luck going into performance review season and into the rest of 2024 and 2025. I'm David Murray, CEO of Confirm, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, month, and year.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks, all.